Living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
Welcome to another episode of Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol. Thank you so much for joining me each week. Glad that you are interested in these kinds of really heart-level issues and seeing how the gospel can bear on some of those issues. I've got a friend with me today, Lynn Marie Cherry, who has an amazing story and some amazing hope that I know will bless you. Lynn, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. And I love that we are here face to face drinking our coffee.
Yes, we do. We have our coffee here. Lynn is an author, a speaker, a wife, and a mother. And I'm going to say this. You don't call yourself this, but I'm going to say that you are an advocate for those who have been betrayed in their relationships.
Yes.
That is just such a big challenge. And you understand that, and you speak for them, and you speak God's life to these individuals. And first of all, I just want to say thank you for doing that, because there aren't that many women out there that are brave enough to do what you are doing.
Yeah, I feel honored to be able to have that voice. And I remember early on in my story feeling like God was going to require me to share it.
Yes.
So I don't think He requires everyone, but I think I knew early on I would tell the story.
Well, share a bit of your story. I have been really amazed at how you lead with your story. You're open and vulnerable about that. And it's one of the ways that God has blessed you in ministry to others. But for our listeners who haven't met you or know you, just tell us some of that story.
Sure. So my husband and I got married right out of college back in 1991. It doesn't seem like it's possible. It could be that long ago. And I just knew early on that something wasn't quite right. I didn't know what it was. And honestly, as a brand new bride, I kind of decided I didn't want to know what it was, and just didn't have the capacity to go there. And so I really chose to just tell myself, I've never been married before. I've never had a husband. I don't really know his world, and it's probably not a big deal. So I did that for a long time. And then when I got pregnant with our first son, I noticed even more of an issue. I think it was the setup, because that year was the same year our house was wired with this brand new thing. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called the internet.
Oh my goodness, yes. I think I do know what that is.
So that was 1996, I believe, that we got high-speed internet in our home. And I was pregnant. I was commuting 2 hours a day, and just... I remember walking by our home office and having that icky feeling in the bottom of my gut that something's not right. And I don't know what's happening in there, but it doesn't feel good.
Right.
And yet thinking, I'm growing a human. I am doing this noble thing, and whatever is happening with my husband, that's his deal. And I really tried to convince myself that was true. It was shortly after our son was born that I realized it wasn't true. That
it wasn't just about him.
Yes, that it was having an effect on me.
Right.
And it was hurting me, and it was, I didn't even know really what all was going on. We'd had maybe 1 or 2 conversations about pornography, and that maybe it was something that was a part of his past. We didn't really have that conversation in present tense terms.
Sure.
But then when our second son was born, that was in 2000. He's a millennial baby. So fun. I brought him home from the hospital, and the week we brought him home, I was up late one night feeding him and saw the light on in our home office. And I remember just feeling, well, first of all, that was an amazing birth story. He was VBAC after, and so I felt like I just won the mom lottery.
Yes.
I'd had a child in the conventional method.
You had done it.
I did it, yes. So I really was like cloud nine, just feeling so elated that I'd gotten to have that experience in birth. And I was feeding the baby, swaddled him up, went back to bed, and I noticed the light was on in our home office. And just in that frame of mind, I thought, oh, my husband's up. And so I walked over, I opened the door, and just instantly felt, and I describe it in my book this way, I felt the steamy enticement of lust followed quickly by the suffocating oppression of shame.
Wow.
It was the 1-2 punch of the enemy.
Yes.
That's enticing us to sin and then immediately heaping shame on us.
Right.
And I believe in that moment, I felt what my husband felt every time he gave in to that. And I saw him in that room looking at pornography on the computer. And again, in that moment, did not know what to do with that, how to deal with that. Now I have a newborn, I have a 3-year-old, my mom's on the sofa bed. Like I could not go there with my mom in the house. And so I closed the door to that room and went back to bed. And I when I look back at that night, I think I began a slow process of dying.
Yes.
Like that was the beginning of the end of me. And I began to just live for my children. They deserved a happy life. They deserved joy. I wanted them to have a family. But I really had kind of relinquished myself to not having joy for myself.
I can, not from personal experience, but I can identify in the way that so many of my readers and listeners write about this or talk to me about this, even though there's no, at that moment anyway, physical interaction between your husband's body and another person's body, you
Right.
still feel betrayed. You
Absolutely.
feel completely betrayed.
Yes, and we would not have used that word. We would not have used the word affair. We would not have used the word infidelity.
Yes.
But in going through group therapy, 4 years later, 5 years later, oh my gosh, in eventually seeking help and reaching out to experts, we began to hear terms like virtual infidelity. And I realized in our group therapy situation that my journey was a lot like the women whose husband had had a physical affair.
Yes.
And so I started to realize, I've been betrayed. And this really did happen to me. And there was a secret life that my husband had that I didn't know anything about.
And that's why I feel like I feel, because I have not been his first and only love. He has not been faithful to me. Even though it's been pictures and videos, he has not been faithful to me.
Right. Yeah. We realized that. And I love the way the counseling group that we went to, they define an affair as the keeping of secrets.
Wow.
Right?
Yes.
So betrayal, I think, can happen in so many levels in our marriages. I know a good friend who had a financial betrayal where her husband was keeping secrets about their money. And she definitely feels betrayed.
Yes. There must have come a time when you couldn't ignore it any longer. Did things kind of fall apart?
I would say rather than things falling apart, they blew up.
Okay.
And I blew up.
Yes.
And so for about 4 years, I denied and coped and pretended and went through the motions, and until ultimately I got angry, which I thank God for that.
Yes.
I've learned that anger is a secondary emotion. A lot of times it follows on the heels of other emotions like sadness and loneliness and fear, and so yet anger is like that thing that tips the scale.
Right.
It scared me. I was okay being sad, and I was okay being lonely. I was okay laying in bed until my kids dragged me out of there, but I wasn't okay being angry. That worried me, and I didn't want to be that mom. I didn't want to be that woman. And so that really was the thing I think that ultimately got my attention, that I have a problem, It's
Yes.
not just my husband who has a problem, but I have a problem.
And if I don't do something about this anger, it is going to affect my kids. It's going to affect me. I am not going to be able to live with my anger if I don't do something about it.
Exactly. I think it's one of God's greatest gifts to me because it forced me to reach out and get some help. There were a couple other things that happened in that season where another woman was brave enough to share a story in her marriage where there was an emotional attachment. And so I saw her and I realized this is the same pain. And yet she was working through it and they were working through it, and that brought hope to me. I remember thinking, oh, if there's an other side for her, there's another side for me too. So that brought a lot of hope. And there was a women's conference I went to. I love conferences. I love conferring with other girls. So at that conference, I really felt like God just had my number. And he really opened my eyes to some things, and that it was time. It was time to wake up. It was time to face this thing and begin to deal with it.
Well, Lynn, just that sense of betrayal and blowing up and all of that, what would you say to a wife who knows that her husband is involved in pornography or something similar in some way, and yet he is not acknowledging that it's a big deal at all? He just feels like it's normal. There is so much in our culture today that says pornography is normal. It's not hurting anybody. It's just, me. And so a wife that is feeling dismissed in that way, what would you say to her?
Yeah, I've been that girl. I was that girl. And I think for a long time my husband believed that, told himself, this only affects me. And he kept pornography in a box in his brain, and in his mind that box didn't touch the family box.
Right.
But I think in a way, seeing my pain and hearing my pain was actually the beginning of him realizing that was a lie. And so I think, number one, you have to express the pain that you're feeling. For me, too, I ended up dealing with physical symptoms that I think came out of all of that emotional baggage that had been stuffed in for so long. So I think you share your pain. I think, too, for a lot of men, it's been a part of their lives since their childhood.
Hi there, it's Dr. Carol. I want to just take a moment and share some exciting news with you, and then we'll get right back to the program.
Are you experiencing emotional well-being, healthy relationships, and a life filled with joy? Or does it seem like you'll never be able to get past your negative mindsets or behavior patterns? How can you have the kind of life God wants for you? Join us on Saturday, September 15th in Austin, Texas, for a special 3-hour event designed with you in mind, to not only learn how it's possible, but also the steps to lasting change. You'll be impacted by powerful teachings and get equipped with practical tools that will transform not only your mindset, but also your spiritual journey and relationships. Discover how spiritual transformation happens. Visit our homepage at www.drcarolministries.com and click the Change Conference banner, or check out the show notes for more information and the link to register.
You mentioned that, David, that was the case for him. Mm-hmm. And as I listened to you tell a bit of your story earlier, you shared that you had to come to understand that he had been traumatized, he had been harmed in that way. What was it like for you to see that this had come out of pain for him, and yet you were still angry? You still had to own that this was not okay. Yeah. So holding that, trying to be godly and loving on one hand, on the other hand saying, no, this cannot continue as it is.
Right.
I have some wives who write to me and say, my husband has PTSD because of various things, and so I'm trying to be compassionate to him. How can I reconcile that?
Yeah, that is hard. And honestly, for someone dealing with betrayal trauma, because it really does cause trauma. So someone dealing with betrayal trauma and a recovering addict, coexisting in the same space. Our home, it was rough. It was really rough for a long time. I think one of the things that helped me a lot in relating to my husband was being able to listen to his story.
Yes.
And to see him not just as the man who hurt me, but also as one of God's sons that had been exposed to pornography at age 7.
Wow.
So being able to have some empathy for that little boy and to see the pain of, and that was easy for me because I had 2 little boys. And I remember just thinking about my son and what it would be like for him to have encountered pornography at age 7.
Yes.
And so that enabled me to have some empathy for my husband. Yes, he had caused me the greatest pain I'd ever experienced in my life, but to be able for a moment to separate myself and see that he was also God's beloved son who was just broken and traumatized in his own way. And, I thank God that when I confronted him, he was willing to get help.
Yes.
No, I'm so grateful for that. There were a few hurdles. There was a lot of shame. There was a risk. I remember just him being anxious and maybe a little bit angry driving to our first therapy session thinking, what if someone we know is there?
Sure.
And I'm going to be exposed. And so there was a lot of risk for him in getting help. And yet I believe in his core, he was ready for this thing to not control his life. And, I think there's different levels of interaction with pornography. There's like a compulsive level where you are thinking, oh, this thing kind of like drives me.
Right.
There's the addictive place where you're not even aware that it's driving you. And so I think that awareness of the power that this other thing has over your life is one of the first ways that hope comes to men or women who are dealing with addiction.
And yes, let's acknowledge that in this case it was your husband, but there are plenty of women out there who struggle with pornography.
There's a growing number of women, and I think it's one of the fastest segments of the pornography industry.
You have mentioned a couple things in alluding to the restoration that God brought your marriage. And we haven't just out and out said that yet, but God did restore your marriage. And that is such a beautiful piece of your story. But you've mentioned a couple things in alluding to that. One is that you had to hear your husband's story. You had to see him for the painful person and the loved child of God that he was. And then he had to see you as the wounded wife, the daughter of God that you are. You had to each be willing to share that depth of your story and your pain and let each other see that. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I think that was a turning point for us. And, one thing that happened, through therapy, I ended up dealing with anxiety and chest pain and insomnia. And I would lay in bed at night and I couldn't sleep. And I remember just this little whisper of the Holy Spirit, ask David to pray for you. And I'm like, no way. I'm not
going to ask him for anything.
Right. I don't want to need anything from anybody at this point, really.
Certainly not him.
Especially not him. And so, I lay there struggling, and then another night asked David to pray for you. And I remember finally turning toward him and saying, I can't sleep, and I feel like there's a brick on my chest, and I need you to pray for me. And he laid there and he was like, God, help my wife go back to sleep. And I'm like, are you for real? Are you for real right now? And I'm like, fine. If that's how this is going to be, fine. So yet it happened over and over. And I remember one night just saying, no, I need you to lay hands on me and pray for me. And so in that moment, really both of us are surrendering. I am choosing to surrender my self-righteous pride, and I don't need you.
Right.
And he's choosing okay, so she does need me, and she wants me for something. And so we had to turn toward each other in those moments, and I really believe God used those prayers to bring our hearts back together and to realize, that we are not the enemy. No, I am not a crazy woman who's overreacting about this issue in your life. And he's not trying to destroy me.
Right.
We are both dealing with this brokenness, and we are broken as individuals, and we can turn toward each other and be broken together. And I think we did that, and that is one thing that led us to being healed together.
There's something that you've alluded to that I hope our listeners are hearing. This was not a one night falling apart and getting up the next morning and your marriage is healed and goes on. This was a challenging process, and it took time.
It took a long time. Yeah, we were in therapy for 2 years. But I am familiar with the model that you mentioned, and we call that in therapy, I learned there's a word for it. It's called pretend normal, where you have a conflict and then you kind of talk about it,
right,
and you wake up the next day and it feels better.
Sure.
And so you think it's better, but you really haven't done any of the work. And so I like pretend normal. I was good at pretending in denial.
Right.
And I had to really deal with the problem was hard, and to realize I don't want to pretend anymore. And when we started therapy, I really thought, pretending was easier. It was definitely easier than this work that we're doing. It was hard work to go into that wound.
Yes.
And I felt like my weekly therapy sessions were like debridement, like they are scraping the wound on my heart for an hour and a half every week. Why would anyone choose that?
Yes.
And yet that's what had to happen in order for me to heal and in order for our relationship to heal.
Talk a little bit about what God has brought you and David to now in the kind of healed relationship that you can experience. If somebody is listening and they're in the middle of that mess, it must be hard to truly believe that things can ever get better. And like you said at the beginning, you gave up ever experiencing any joy for yourself.
Right. Yeah.
But talk about what the end can become.
It's just such a triumph to look at our family and our marriage and think we made it through that hell on earth, which is what it felt like.
Yes.
We made it through. And I remember when we celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary, it was just the sweetest time. We went away together, and it was it was in Mexico, and it was so lovely, and we were just enjoying that time together. Meanwhile, at home, things were kind of falling apart for our kids. And we were getting messages from the boys. On top of that, my husband had an ulcer in his eye. Like, we had to go to the hospital in Cancun.
Oh, ouch.
And then we had to go to the pharmacy where they just handed us stuff, and we wouldn't even speak the language. It was crazy. So there was a lot going on externally on that trip, and yet we were able to stay steady and find joy in the midst of that chaos. And to me, that was a moment of thinking, okay, you know what? We can pretty much navigate anything.
Right. If we can get through this, then
Right. Yeah. And there's no going back to the marriage you had back in 1991 or whenever you got married.
Right.
I am really dating myself there. There's no going back to that marriage. You can't go back. But I think we have a new marriage now, and he has a new wife, and I have a new husband. And we have something that is solid, and we have a lot of confidence going forward in our lives together, knowing that we have tools, we have strategies, we have communication that we never had. We've got so much going for us now that was birthed out of that chaos and trauma and work that we did in response to it. And we were like, that work was hard, and it was brutal going to counseling for 2 years, but that is what rebuilt the foundation of our lives together.
Beautiful, Lynn. And what a testimony to what God can do.
Yeah.
God can do things however he chooses, and there may be times he does things in one moment. But what your testimony and David's testimony shows is that through that process, God uses what felt like horrible pain, and it was.
Yeah.
It was incredibly painful. But he uses that to build something that both blesses you, your family, and now others.
Absolutely.
You wrote a book, and tell us a little bit about the 40 Days book that you wrote.
Yes. So I started journaling. I've never been a journaler, but I started journaling in our recovery process. And I noticed I in addition to our group for couples, I went to a group with just betrayed spouses.
Sure.
And so in that group, we would all share our homework every week. And I remember noticing that the other girls in the group really liked the way I expressed my journey.
Sure.
It resonated with them, and somehow I was able to put words together in a way that affirmed how they were feeling. And so I wrote a 21-day devotional. That's the very first step I took. And then, do you know Dr. Milton Magnus?
Not real well, but yes.
I sent that to him, and he was so encouraging. He's like, this is great, and you need to expand it and put it out there. And so then I added another 19 days. I thought the wilderness metaphor was good.
Very much so.
Number 40 resonated, and so I expanded it to 40 days, and I released it in 2016. So far, there's 2,700 copies out there.
Beautiful.
Which is over 100,000 days of hope.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
And just to put it in that perspective, over 100,000 days of hope that others have been able to receive because of you sharing your story.
Yeah.
We will put that link to your book in our show notes.
Great.
And just a word or two about some of the other things that you are doing right now. You are, as I said at the beginning, an advocate now for those who have been betrayed, and you are working to help other people find that hope that you found.
Yes, I am. I'm part of a planning committee for a couple different events. The first one that's coming up September 14th in Austin, Texas, is the Lone Star Coalition Against Pornography. And that is really about just starting a conversation, bringing Texans together to say, hey, this isn't just normal, and it's having an effect on our relationships, on our own hearts. It's impacting our world. And so we're bringing together Texans to talk about pornography on that Friday morning. We also have a Take Action lunch where we're going to really look at how we can make an impact as faith leaders, as millennials, as specialists, and there's one other category that's evading me right now. But just really to say, how can we take what we've learned and go out and make a difference in the world? And then the other event that I'm a part of is the Hope Rising one-day conference for betrayed spouses. That is for men and women who've been through betrayal. It's put on by affairrecovery.com.
Oh, yes.
Which is the group that my husband and I got help through. So I've been able to be a video blogger for them, and now I'm helping them with this conference. Cindy Beal from Oklahoma is our keynote speaker. I'll be speaking at that, and we also have a great team of experts coming together and other betrayed spouses who are going to share. That is Saturday, October 6th from 9 to 4:30.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Lynn, for leading with your story and allowing God to use your story to bring hope to so many. If our listeners would like to connect with you, find out about what you're doing, and stay in touch with your writing and so on, how can they find you?
Yeah, it's really easy. I'm at lynnmariecherry.com, and that's cherry just like the fruit. I'm also on Instagram at lynnmariecherry.
And we'll put those links in the show notes as well. Thank you for being on the program today and bringing hope to our listeners as well.
My privilege.
God bless you.
Thanks.
If you are a spouse who has felt hurt and betrayed by pornography or any other way, I pray that this episode with Lynn has given you some hope. Lynn and David's story shows that God can work amazing restoration in what seems like the most impossible circumstances. That's the message that I hope you carry in your heart, and I know Lynn wants you to carry in your heart as well. Do check out the show notes for this episode. We'll have the link to Lynn's website there, the links to Lynn's profiles on social media so you can connect with her there, and also to her book, Keep Walking, 40 Days to Hope and Freedom After Betrayal. Very raw, very personal, but also very hope-filled and practical. If you're in the Central Texas region especially, you certainly will want to check out Lynn's upcoming events that she referenced. We'll have those notes in the show notes. The Hope Rising one-day conference for betrayed spouses, and also the Lone Star Coalition Against Pornography event. I don't want to close this episode without giving you a personal invitation to the Dr. Carol Ministries upcoming conference, Changed. You may have been seeing us mention this if you follow us on our website or social media, and you probably have heard about this in recent podcast episodes. September 15, coming up in just a couple weeks. Don't wait till the last minute and risk the tickets being all sold out. If you go to drcarolministries.com, right there on our homepage, you'll see the banner for the Changed conference. Click that banner, find out details, and get your ticket for Changed today. I hope to see you there. And until next time, may God bless you.